It doesn't matter because the visual information will still be the same. But fuck it, you want my real opinion? Sharp pixels and CRT as my broad, non-specific answer. I've been playing retro games for a long time now. In that time, I've dabbled in just about every conceivable way there is to display a retro game. I did start like most, good old shitty composite cable on a good old shitty CRT. Then, thanks to emulated releases on Wii, Wii U, and PS3, I played many retro games on a modern HD TV with more clear pixels. My friend then introduced me to the My Life in Gaming and other complementary channels to send me down the unglory rabbit hole of game video output. So let's get down to brass tacks. My ultimate preference is CRT. My penultimate preference is clear pixels, and my antepenultimate preference is original resolution. What do I mean by that? Well, regardless of what your preferences are, games are always made with a specific resolution in mind. For 50 years, 480i was the standard resolution for all consumers. Then it was 1080p for like 10 years before we suddenly demanded 4K to be the new standard. So let's briefly recap the console generations and their corresponding target resolutions. From the 2600 to the PS1 and N64, games were mostly designed around a resolution of 240p, sometimes 480i. For the 6th gen, mostly 480i, with occasional support for 480p. For 7th gen, 720p should have been the focus, but 1080p was the desired resolution. 8th gen, 1080p, but 4K was in high demand. 9th gen, today, 4K, but still hilariously rare in a native state. Call it a hot take, but lately I've come to care less and less about a game's internal resolution. The higher it goes, the smaller the difference you'll see. And even for most modern games, the full 4K really isn't necessary. It's nice, but I'm of the camp that will always prefer better performance over higher resolutions. Regardless of how a game, retro or otherwise, is displayed, I do take the resolution it was designed around in a moderate account. So to start, why sharp pixels? Retro games released before the dawn of HD TVs were primarily played on cathode ray tube technology. Whether it be a consumer-grade TV, a professional variety like PVMs, or higher-res consumer CRTs that may have actually supported HDMI. In this day and age, however, I'd reckon it's far more likely for someone to play retro games with the more fixed pixel look, compared to the analog technology of the past. Not to mention retro-inspired games of today sticking with a crisp pixel look to mimic its predecessors. For HD TVs, this is just the easiest option, and it's not entirely inaccurate. During development, the visuals for retro games have always started with grid art to illustrate the game's visuals. Such art would then be used on box covers and manuals. They'd also be developing these games on PVMs, which maintain a crisp pixel look more than consumer CRTs. The old consoles themselves even supported higher quality analog signals beyond composite. Quality signals like component or RGB or even S-video passed through a digital upscaler on an HD TV with no other visual tweaks leads to clean, sharp pixels. Since many of these systems had inherent capacity to produce this crisp look, I don't see it as any less valid. The tools were always there. With the birth of emulators on fixed pixel displays came the birth of countless types of filters to tinker with how these retro games can be displayed. Feels like the retro version of PC graphic settings. These filters are actually necessary as there are legit issues with achieving a perfect pixel look. The main one is shimmering. When a lower resolution is displayed on a higher resolution frame with a non-integer upscale, it leads to uneven pixel sizing, causing shimmering. It can lead to the 4:3 versus 1:1 aspect ratio argument. Now, some games may have had a particular aspect ratio in mind during development because, again, devs were working with fixed pixel illustrations, but I'm sorry, no matter the case, I'm team 4:3. At the end of the day, most tube displays, no matter the quality, had a 4:3 aspect ratio, so that's how most of these games were seen. The only reason 1:1 proportions would be used is just because it would be easier in fixed pixel environments, like modern retro releases or lower res handhelds. 4:3 is typically the default anyway, as long as there's no shimmering. Out of all the filters that could be used to remedy this, Bilinear is the most common. There's hundreds of different filters now, and I'm not covering them all. Bilinear is pretty self-explanatory. It softens the edges to average out pixel size. It's a very sensible technique that can benefit games from 6th gen systems and above. Now, for games in the resolutions of 240p, I really don't care for this look. All the respect if you like it, it's often included in most retro compilations, but within the fixed pixel environment, No thanks. I just don't think I'm getting an accurate representation of what the devs were going for when the game is displayed like this. They probably didn't look at their sprite art in this way when creating them. It's a soft image that for lower res systems comes off as visually unappealing, because besides the removal of shimmering, it does nothing to benefit the interpretation of the image. People like CRTs because how it can complement the sprite art created to add detail and hide imperfections, and believe me, we'll get there. Bilinear doesn't really do that. It just smears the pixels in a blurry, non-desirable way. Oh yeah, crispy pixels. Hey, wait. What are you doing? Hey, come on. What the fuck are you doing? Stop that. Oh. Trust me, as someone with shitty eyesight, having a blurry view sucks ass. So Bilinear just comes off as unfocused pixels, which I don't really like. I recall it was the #1 thing people hated about the Wii U NES Virtual Console besides the horrendous input lag. It's a reason many were upset over the launch of Metal Gear Master Collection or even Sonic Origins. Luckily, the perfect fix is a modern mainstay, and that's Bilinear Sharp, otherwise known as interpolation. Thanks to higher native resolutions, pixels can be softened by just a hair to maintain a crisp look whilst also maintaining pixel uniformity without suffering visual side effects. For me, it's the best of both worlds, and more often I'm perfectly fine with it. You really can't tell the difference from normal playing distance, and if you can, I'm going to ask you to stop sniffing the screen. Visually, there's no downsides. You get smooth scrolling from the removal of pixel shimmering, and it maintains a crisper look. As far as all the other pixel enhancing filters are concerned, I personally would never use them. Sprites are almost never complimented from using these blending techniques. I do appreciate updated sprite art, as those are created from scratch for a more detailed look. For example, I do prefer the remastered visuals for Cave Story compared to the original. The updated sprites came from Daisuke Amaya himself and looks practically the same anyway, just cleaner. Other examples would be Mario All-Stars, the Final Fantasy re-releases, or if you want a real strange example, AVGN 1 and 2 Deluxe. So for 240p sources, this crisp pixel look is my usual go-to when playing on flat panel displays. It looks the cleanest and is usually the most attractive in direct capture as it's the easiest to preserve. Achieving this look on original consoles can be a bit of a bitch. If your console doesn't support higher quality output, you'll either have to invest in internal mods, which can be difficult and expensive, or just make do with the lower quality signals. Not much of an issue on CRTs, but on flat screens, a low quality signal from low resolutions results in a look that's just straight up nasty. 480 resolution content may fare better, but even still, there's high demand to give these old consoles better video signals. Frankly, it's the chief benefit from emulators, and it's why this look is often associated with emulation. But even then, in cases like Dolphin, it took a while to be able to play games without a soft bilinear look. Some say it's inauthentic because consoles like GameCube and Wii always had a more soft look when played on flat screens, but this was more often due to combat interlacing. Interlacing is when fields of a resolution alternate back and forth. The primary video signal on CRT TVs was 480i, interlacing, at a 60Hz refresh. The most predominant aspect of this is the noticeable flicker of the alternating fields. On old CRTs, it's hardly noticeable at 60 FPS. Kind of goes away after staring at it long enough. On flat panels, it can be far more distracting to the eye, which is why most flat panels perform a de-interlacing step to get rid of the flicker. Interlacing in its primal form is pretty much non-existent today. It's still used in modern games to boost game performance by allowing games to display at higher resolutions while only rendering half of it. The modern equivalents would include checkerboard rendering and AI upscaling like DLSS and Pisser that the kids like gassing up now. But in every case, the full progressive resolution will always produce a cleaner output. Even on CRT displays, a progressive resolution is advantageous. It's chiefly why PVMs are highly sought after. But like I said, the flicker isn't that noticeable or distracting on CRTs. The soft look on GameCube and Wii is mostly to reduce that flicker as much as possible on CRT TVs. But a few games give you the option to turn it off to allow for a sharper pixel look on flat screen TVs. Remember that HD TVs were definitely used for these consoles, the Wii especially. It's just frustrating that so few games support this. This right here led to all these internal mods for GCN and Wii, as well as homebrew methods to force the flicker filter off, and is often advertised as creating your own remasters. People want those pixels. The PS2 is the ultimate CRT console because barely any game on PS2 even supports progressive resolutions. and if it does, you'll need component cables to even use it. Too bad I've already invested in SCART. There are de-interlacing options, but even the best ones can't completely remove some of the artifacts that can occur. Otherwise, a motion adaptive de-interlacer usually provides the best overall image to interlaced video while maintaining a sharp look. All this fuss is why people just like increasing the native res, but you all may know I'm not crazy about rendering older games at a higher native resolution. It's just not a look I'm too into. It's the least flattering for 240p games, and not too bad for 480p games. But 720 and above is the HD realm, and even today, modern games may only reach a 720 or 1080 target, especially on handhelds. Even still, when an integer scale is available to crisp up the pixels, I'll take it. The RetroTink 4K makes playing modern consoles that use 720 and 1080 on 4K TVs especially interesting, as HD TVs today still don't offer an integer scale option for some bumfuck reason. Even with these higher resolutions, gotta admit those pixels look nicer to me, even though the difference is really not that noticeable from normal playing distance. So that's sharp pixels. Many retro purists still don't like this look because it can make certain games look more dated, or just be an eyesore. It doesn't help when a game tries to implement visual tricks that don't translate well to this look. Tricks like dithering can make the game look like a total mess. Even still, I like sharp pixels because at the end of the day, it represents the game's visuals in the most pure form. And no matter how you prefer to view retro games, this is the empty canvas you can always start with, as it's what the developers start with. Which leads me to my personal preferred way to play retro games, and it's either on a real CRT or some kind of CRT filter. I've mentioned playing on CRTs several times now, but here I want to really dwell on why I like it so much. Of course, I use the term CRT very broadly because there's countless versions of CRT technology, but overall I do believe in the legitimate benefits that come from playing retro games on CRT TVs. Probably the most practical one is zero input lag. CRTs will add no input latency from the controller to the game, and even today, HD TVs can't compete with it. The other practical benefit is motion clarity. We all know motion blur, and in modern games, it's definitely an acquired taste. But even with every motion setting set to 0, fixed pixel displays will exhibit some kind of motion smearing in the image. If you can't notice it, you're the lucky one, and luckily it's not easy for me to demonstrate. I'd recommend checking out Blur Busters to get a better idea. On CRTs, motion from camera movement and pixel scrolling have an ultra-crisp look that just isn't on modern HD TVs. This is all due to how a CRT creates an image. A cathode or electron gun shoots light particles onto a mask, which is where the image is drawn. Quite literally drawn across the screen at speeds so fast your eyes can't see it. A full frame is drawn in 1/60th of a second for 60Hz displays. Take a shot for another channel using slow-mo, guys, but hey, that's what happens when they're the only ones doing these experiments with a camera that costs this much. Once the next line begins drawing, the previous frame is completely gone, leading to motion clarity that looks unreal on a CRT. With fixed pixel displays, even with the lowest latency, there will still be video information from the previous frame as the new one is shown. You can see the previous frame fade away as the new one emerges, leading to moving images having a blurry, undefined look to it. Worse in some games than others, but it's hard to unsee it. The only practical way modern displays can combat this is by having higher refresh rates. But even 120 FPS on a flat panel doesn't have the same motion clarity as 60 FPS on a CRT. I've read recently monitors reaching up to 480 FPS can have a similar motion clarity to CRTs. But even still, higher frames like 120 and above will look far more crisp on a CRT compared to HD TVs. It's just too bad high refresh CRTs are kinda hard to come by. The other modern solution is black frame insertion, a new but otherwise standard feature on high refresh HD TVs that at least have 120 Hz. Black frame insertion applies a completely black frame in between every other frame. 120 Hz is required so that you can still experience 60 FPS content in this manner. The result absolutely makes motion a lot more clear. It's especially noticeable in retro games. To be honest, even in modern games I will use BFI as it makes 60 FPS look so good. I played Astrobot with it and it was amazing. The caveat is that because a completely black frame is inserted, it does make the image noticeably darker. The use of high dynamic range can circumvent the darkening with additional luminance. The other thing is the flicker. Using BFI produces a noticeable flicker. But like with interlacing on a CRT, the flicker goes away as your eyes naturally adjust to it. A new solution in the works is rolling BFI, or beam emulation. The RetroTink 4K now has firmware implementing it, but it's also available to try on RetroArch. The final and predominant benefit to CRTs to me are the masks. These masks differ depending on what type of CRT display you have. Slot and shadow are the most common for consumer-grade sets. Aperture grille is the Sony standard that many consider the best, but it's all personal preference. These masks are the real stars of CRTs to me because it's where the signature look comes from. You can think of these masks like subpixels on a fixed pixel display, but it's not quite the same. CRTs don't have defined resolutions like flat panels. A CRT's resolution is defined by how many lines are drawn per frame. 540 is the NTSC standard for consumer-grade sets, but only 480 is usually visible, and only half is drawn at a time due to a CRT's interlacing. The signature scanline look for 240p games comes from a video trick from old consoles to get these consumer sets to output a progressive resolution. 240p actually looks like this in its raw state. 480i CRTs receiving a 240p signal would simply skip every other line of resolution during the full 60Hz refresh, allowing for no flicker while playing. Crazy to think devs were still skimping on resolution back then, but hey, it doesn't matter because these games don't look dated at all. Here's the thing about CRTs. Because of how CRTs generate an image, they are a lot more friendly towards lower quality signals, mismatched resolutions, and they can inject a lot more perceptible detail. Let's start with lower quality signals. On HD TVs, it's hard to get away with using cheap cables. Like I said before, it just results in an image that looks gross. But through a CRT, the difference is almost negligible. Composite versus RGB on a CRT can be quite minor, especially with the same comparison on a flat panel. Hell, many of these games even benefit from a lower quality signal to take advantage of how a CRT displays an image. The use of dithering is an easy example. Many cases where transparency is needed, devs will simply use a dither pattern. Dithering can also be used to add shading and gradients. Pretty obnoxious looking with sharp pixels, not gonna lie, but through a CRT, it totally works. It's why using the highest quality signals on CRTs may not always be the best choice. A sharper image will always benefit flat panels, but a softer image is a CRT's specialty. Artwork that can look chunky and bit crunched can look just like a hand-drawn illustration on a CRT. The extra blur on a CRT can do wonders to sell the illusion. Check out these examples from accounts like CRT Pixels and Pro Pixels, probably the best library of comparisons between sharp pixels and CRT. Dracula's portrait in Symphony of the Night just has 2 red pixels for his eyes. It doesn't really work with sharp pixels, looks more like a rendering error. The horizontal blur and blending on a CRT totally sells the image of him having rageful eyes with a piercing stare. The Chrono Trigger portrait is pretty common. The chunky blotches of white pixels looks more like a bad skin condition. On a CRT, it's blended more naturally and looks like light reflecting off the skin like it should. The MGS codec calls look so good this way. You can actually make out the strands of hair more clearly. Okay, big whoop, these are portraits or HUD elements or other stationary images. But even in-game the difference is remarkable. Sonic is known for its waterfall effects. Gotta admit, it looks more convincing through a CRT with crappier signals. The water in Zelda on NES has speckled pixels which, okay, not sure what the point. Hey, wait a minute, what the fuck? Where'd those additional colors come from? It looks like light reflecting off the ripples now. The Resident Evil pre-rendered backgrounds were literally made for CRTs. Played with sharp pixels, it's often hard to interpret what details and objects are actually supposed to be. On a CRT, it's far easier to interpret. Without the original source files for these pre-rendered backgrounds, then unfortunately this is probably the best they're ever going to look. So if you're playing on original hardware, then frankly you can keep those cheap composite cables. The extra softening on a CRT is a feature, not a bug like it can be on fixed pixel displays. The only way sharp pixels can achieve a similar illusion of clarity is with extreme pixel density. Basically pixels being so small that you can't even see them. It's another reason handhelds could get away with it because you're not going to be able to make out those pixels on such a small screen. It's why handheld players insist on those original screens. Re-releases on HD TVs now usually include some form of grid filter to replicate that effect, and I highly recommend it if possible. Now for mismatched resolutions. CRTs aren't bound to their native resolutions like flat panels are. With flat panels, if the resolution is lower than the native resolution, then upscaling is necessary. but most modern displays usually cheap out on this with a basic upscale. It's why you might find 1080p to look soft and blurry on a 4K TV, where it'll look a lot more crisp and natural on a native 1080p TV. CRTs don't typically upscale, so whatever resolution you run through it, if accepted, it'll look good and natural. HD CRTs unfortunately do upscale when accepting, say, 240p, but I believe this can be circumvented with a line doubler like the OSSC with basic scan lines. Another reason PVMs and old VGA monitors are in high demand. Resolutions of all kind can look totally clean and natural, making using lower resolutions for, say, performance purposes a lot more appealing. But unfortunately, the CRT you're most likely going to find is the standard consumer set. This leads to the real-world problems of using a CRT. For one thing, you're most likely going to be limited to composite input, maybe even mono sound if it doesn't support stereo.
Snake, don't worry about it. There's more to being a good person than just having a stereo television.
Some newer sets may support component, which is really nice for Wii, GameCube, PS2, and Xbox. For consoles older than that, then you're not benefiting much from component, so it's no real loss. Even then, those 6th gen systems would be just fine with composite. It's why they all shipped with it. It's how most people will play them. You ever played a Wii on a CRT? It's unreal how good it looks. There's also the size and weight. Nowadays, it can be taken for granted how easy it is to have such large displays. But CRTs, the screen is literally a giant light bulb, a thick mass of glass of extreme air pressure. It's why they're built into these large-ass chassis. Even the smallest CRTs can be cumbersome to move and hard to store. 24 inches is usually the sweet spot. Smaller screens can actually benefit from the extra pixel density and reduced interlace flicker. But if you're like me and prefer a larger display, then you have my condolences. My dumbass friend cursed me with a 36-inch Sony Wega that takes up a quarter of my bedroom space. Seriously, look at this fucking thing. Hey man, are you sure we can lift this? Yeah, this thing is only listed at like 100 pounds. It'll be fine. Just arch your back, it'll feel less heavy that way. Okay, go! Oh, shit! Nah, I'm just kidding. This thing is awesome. Thanks, Nate. For real though, CRTs are heavy as shit, so moving them around, you have to treat them like furniture. Shankmods recently released a documentary on the sheer challenge in procuring the world's largest CRT at a gargantuan 43 inches. I mean, fuck. I would be extremely jealous for not being able to play on this humunga lunga no gungus display. Well, actually I am still kind of jealous, but there are alternatives that we'll get into. For what it's worth, a smaller screen on a CRT still has a more weighty feel than the same size on a flat screen. Speaking of which, some CRTs have a flat screen, and some are curved. Shouldn't really cause a difference if you're playing right in front of the TV, but you may be subject to warping issues otherwise. Some screens may be subject to overscan, which can end up cropping parts of the image. There could be burn-in issues, especially on old arcade machines with demo screens on constant loop. There could be convergence issues that'll split the red, green, blue colors from the electron gun. If you want to know more, Godpoo recently made a video going over these issues. He's also proof that CRT appeal isn't just nostalgia. Unfortunately, it's not too easy to acquire a legitimate CRT, even on the cheap side. The niche value alone has caused fuckwat resellers to pass off cheap sets as retro TVs at outrageous prices. Getting a CRT should be like how I got this piece of shit. Facebook Marketplace for free from a sweet old couple who wanted to get rid of it. Your options can be extremely limited if you don't want to spend on expensive shipping. Should anything go wrong with your CRT, repairment is often unadvisable. This Trinitron that belongs to my friend has been my trusty tube for many years, though lately the left speaker finally went out. Normally I'd be hella down to crack it open and fix it myself, but there's a real risk of sustaining an electric shock. I read that simply buying external speakers is the better method for this. It can even upgrade a mono-only TV if that's all you got.
Mono TV.
For the most part, my only advice would be to just put up with it. Unless you either have the skills or resources to repair CRT TVs, then it's not really recommended in most cases. They are an unsupported technology right now. For what it's worth, if you have the interest and can find a decent enough consumer tube for either cheap or free, then it's totally worth having one. Luckily now we have really good alternatives. Filters. Nowadays, filters for retro games have gotten a lot more sophisticated compared to your basic pixel blending and scan lines. Now we have filters specifically made to replicate how a CRT handles an image. I want to mention now that for an official retro release, you're most likely not going to get decent filters. All you'll get is basic scan lines and maybe some horizontal blur. Results vary, but most of the time it really doesn't look that good. Like, they don't complement retro visuals like how a real CRT does. Sonic Mania is a rare retro-inspired game to have an acceptable CRT filter because it attempts to simulate a CRT mask. Otherwise, most console scanline filters frankly look like shit. But now, filters on unofficial emulators and other devices can look quite acceptable. The first filter that made me convinced that a real CRT may not be necessary anymore is CRT Royale. CRT Royale on a basic flat panel does an amazing job replicating the bloom and color blending of a real CRT. Alone, it's leagues better than any basic scanline filter I've ever seen. Luckily, CRT Royale is commonplace on most emulators. You can also use it on other programs like Reshade, RetroArch, to even Shader Glass, which seemed really cool, but I've had conflicting success with it. The only consideration is that you'll want to have a display that's at least 1440p. It's because this filter actually tries to replicate the mask of a CRT, and a lower resolution might not be able to reproduce a CRT mask effectively, as well as scan lines not being uniform. If you don't have access to a 4K display, then I'd recommend CRT Royale as the beginner-friendly CRT filter that should satisfy most. I've played plenty of games with it, and toggling it off on emulators certainly shows why the CRT look has made a resurgence recently. If you're willing to go a step further, then there's options like CyberLab's Death to Pixels filters and the RetroTink 4K. I've mentioned these briefly before, but let's recap and go a little deeper. CyberLab's filters can be used through various means, but RetroArch remains the most convenient. In this territory, it's not just mimicking a CRT mask, it literally becomes the CRT mask. You can now visually make out the red, green, and blue values from the simulated electrode. Many presets exist for various consoles and effects. You can even go mess with the parameters further to dial in your ultimate CRT look. I'm not savvy enough to tinker with these settings. Most I'll mess with is blurring options, mask type, luminance, and maybe color alterations. Otherwise, I'd advocate to just enable and forget. The sooner you're actually playing the game, the better. If you have a display that's 4K, then I'd highly recommend these filters. The other alternative is the RetroTink 4K. I've already made a video on this device, but I'd like to elaborate a little further and address some issues. The Tink 5X also has effective CRT filters that are about as on par with CRT Royale. The Tink 4K has the most advanced CRT generator of any digital upscaler, allowing for really accurate mask simulation of various types. You can dial in the filters from scratch yourself or select pre-made profiles for easy access. Whether you prefer slot mask, shadow, aperture grill, or even smiley face, there's a mask type for you. Masks to replicate specific consumer and PVM sets are also an option for those who can't procure them. Even interlaced content, mainly PS2, can be transformative through these filters. The Tink 4K's CRT interlacing simulation is shockingly close, and frankly, it will be how I play PS2 on my OLED going forward. Now let's address the problem. Capturing these filters is extremely difficult. Like a real CRT, you have to see these filters in person with your own eye. With indirect capture, it leads to problems like colors getting messed up or brightness not being retained. So let's break it down. All of my footage is not recorded in high dynamic range, but I am using HDR signals. HDR for these filters are practically a necessity because they make the image extremely dark. The only other alternative is simply decreasing the strength of the filter itself. I don't typically record in HDR because I figure most people wouldn't be viewing the footage on an HDR display anyway, and the file sizes for HDR capture are enormous. But even then, I'm not sure if HDR is the cause of the color issues I keep reading about. No, I'm pretty sure it's just window sizes. Here, try it out. Put the video in windowed mode, and then play with the size of the window. See the bars of color manifesting? See how you can be left with a tint of one color? That is the filter when it's really compressed. The best way to circumvent this is by watching in full screen as high a resolution as possible. I could also zoom the footage in to reduce compression. I did do a little color correcting to hopefully make the footage more natural in this video. I kept reading about a red and pink hue in my other videos. Hopefully it's more visually palpable now. These color issues aren't prevalent on CRT Royale simply because that filter isn't as sophisticated. Any other issues could stem from just me being a little colorblind. Regardless, I promise on the TV itself, the colors look fine. It's redundant anyway because I stress you can make adjustments yourself to get the colors just how you want them. You're in full control. The best these direct captures can do is give you a precursor to what these filters are capable of. Don't think about the colors or brightness, just focus on the blending of the pixels. When playing on a CRT is unavailable, then I like to use these filters. I never thought it mattered much anyway because any direct capture will never fully represent how it'll look natively on the screen. I still love using these filters on the 4K because of the unique application. A CRT filter can be like a bandage for crappy signals and low resolution caps. Say you don't want to spend hundreds of dollars modding your consoles for RGB. Slap a CRT filter on a composite signal and forget about those fancy mods. If size matters, then say no more. Bet it was probably easier to set this up than this fucking thing. A new favorite is pretending I have an HD CRT. Let me give you an example. There is no way to play the Shadow of the Colossus remake at 60 FPS in 4K, not even on PS5. You're stuck with 1080p, which can look quite blurry on a 4K TV. You can upscale it to 4K using the RetroTink for extra crispness, but that'll only do so much. Owners of high-resolution CRTs like PVMs and VGA monitors swear by the clarity of them, so let's try it with the Tink 4K. The maximum resolution you can play with for 60 FPS is 1080p, so we can treat the Tink 4K like a 1080p CRT. You know, I'll be damned. Again, it can only show so much through direct capture. There are banding issues during fast movement and darker scenes because these filters are a motherfucker on the bitrate. But here's the thing, it doesn't look distractingly soft anymore, or at least it doesn't look like a poor upscale. Because understand, regardless if you're using sharp pixels or not, the amount of seeable detail is the exact same. It's what I was trying to say at the start before all this madness, that no matter how you view a game, the visual content you see will be no different. It's only how your eyes interpret it. Playing higher res games with CRT filters gives them an otherworldly look, almost a pre-rendered level of clarity. Success varies by game though. Demon's Souls already looks crisp as hell at 60 FPS, so the filters don't do a whole lot. Still looks really cool. One area that can be challenging is text. Modern games usually use really small text, which doesn't translate well through a mask. In these cases, it'll help to make the Tink simulate a tube with a high line count. Capturing these filters ain't happening though. The colors are all fucked. Again, in person, it looks fine and can go a long way if you have to settle for 1080p for performance. Now, you have my word that I'll never use filters to capture 720p and 1080p, cause, come on, I'm not that crazy. Of course, my favorite application is retro re-releases. I'm sorry, but these filters genuinely boost the appeal of playing retro games on modern consoles for me. Even retro-inspired games that were never even developed for CRTs will almost always look good with these filters. They're still designed for low resolutions, and low resolutions are a CRT specialty. I just love all the random crap I can do. The Switch is the only modern console that can output 480p. Getting 240p is easy. Just set the console to 720 and then prescale it by 1/3 to end up with 240. 480 ain't that easy, which blows for games designed around that resolution, making the Switch really cool for this. Try any game from the Wii or GameCube at 480p with a CRT filter and it's really something. Which reminds me, you know how everyone thinks Wii and GameCube games look like shit on Wii U? Soft blurry pixels, chroma shift and all that? Well, let's fix that. Usually setting the Wii U to 480p is a tremendously bad idea, but for this purpose it should be fine. Gotta admit, not too bad. Frankly, I've never noticed the video issues on Wii U to begin with. It always looked the same as component directly to the TV to me, but I'll definitely be using these filters when you're not looking because come on, GameCube and Wii look awesome like this. Like I said in my previous video, these filters can act like an equalizer for any retro release. I keep old consoles just to use on real CRTs, and believe me, nothing will beat the real deal. Yet. But should that not be possible, I'm more than comfortable using these filters on a newer release from the sheer convenience. But ultimately, you pick whatever looks best for you. In all my years of playing retro games, I've consolidated my tastes to these two options: sharp pixels and CRT. But even those don't matter because what does is the game itself. I am glad to have more control though when the devs fail to provide it. I'll get my transparent waterfalls one way or another, god damn it. That should just about cover it. I'm thankful and astonished to those with enough patience to sit through all this crap. What are your thoughts on these matters? Is there really a definitive look for retro games, or games period? Even now, we see modern games continue to push the limits at the expense of performance for the sake of fancy graphic techniques that most won't even notice or care. It's why I like the simplicity of retro games, where you can just pick it up and play it with no second thought of how it should look. Though having all these new options is certainly pretty cool. The next few videos are pretty set in stone, and I'll try to have them out as soon as I can. So until next time, that's all for me today. So all that's left for me to say is thank you for watching.